The Cursed Queen, Elizabeth Bathory, Blood Countess or political victim. They say she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, but truth, like blood, has a way of staining every story it touches. 1-6. The Whisper Beneath the Velvet. In the cold stone halls of Cocktice Castle, they say screams once echoed behind velvet curtains. Girls went in, but never came out. The villagers whispered, the clergy prayed, and nobles averted their eyes. At the center of it all stood a woman of grace and iron, Elizabeth Bathory. To some, she was a monster who killed hundreds. To others, a brilliant mind crushed by jealousy and political greed. But before she became the infamous Blood Countess, she was simply a girl born into power and darkness. 2. Born of bloodlines. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful and ancient families in the Kingdom of Hungary. The House of Bathory had noble roots stretching back to the 13th century, and through her veins flowed the blood of princes, bishops, and warriors. Her family crest bore dragons and wolves, a fitting omen for what was to come. She was related to Stephen Bathory, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Her family's name carried weight, wealth, and influence, but it also carried a burden. Madness, cruelty, and secrets ran through its branches like rot in an old tree. Even as a child, Elizabeth was exceptionally intelligent. She spoke Latin, German, Hungarian, and even some Greek. She studied philosophy, politics, and science, rare achievements for a noblewoman of her time. But brilliance did not shield her from the world's darkness. Some say she witnessed brutal punishments carried out on peasants as a child. Others claim she suffered from violent seizures, possibly due to inbreeding, common among European nobles. Whatever the truth, Elizabeth did not grow up in innocence. She was raised in a world where power justified cruelty, and blood was the price of prestige. A marriage forged in power. At the age of 15, Elizabeth was married to Ferenc Nadasdy, a high-ranking noble and military commander. Their union merged two of the most powerful families in Hungary. Ferenc gifted her Cocktice Castle, nestled in the Carpathian Mountains. It would become both her fortress and her prison. While Ferenc rode off to war against the Ottoman Empire, Elizabeth remained behind to manage vast estates. She was more than capable. She handled finances, legal disputes, and even governed the peasants with stern precision. But with power came resentment. Her intelligence and authority were viewed as unnatural by many men of her time. A woman so powerful, so educated, it unsettled them. Ferenc, though a fearsome warrior nicknamed the Black Knight of Hungary, was often away, and Elizabeth was left alone, surrounded by servants, suspicion, and silence. Then, the girls started disappearing. A castle of shadows. It began as whispers. Peasant girls who came to work in the castle's kitchens or as maids vanished. Their families received no answers. Some claimed the girls had run away. Others said they had fallen ill. But rumors grew. Some said Elizabeth punished her servants cruelly, that she beat them, starved them, even burned them with hot irons. Some whispered she had an obsession with youth and beauty, and would do anything to keep it. One tale, told in hushed voices, said a maid had accidentally pulled Elizabeth's hair while brushing it. In a rage, Elizabeth struck the girl so hard blood splattered onto her hand. Later, she believed her skin looked smoother, younger, where the blood had touched. Thus began the legend. Elizabeth Bathory bathed in the blood of virgins to stay forever young. Whether myth or memory, the blood had been spilled, and the whispers turned into cries. The accusations emerge. By the early 1600s, rumors became impossible to ignore. Reports reached the ears of King Matthias II. He ordered György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary and Elizabeth's own cousin, to investigate. On December 29, 1610, Thurzo raided Cocktice Castle. What he claimed to find was horrifying. Dead girls, dying girls, girls chained to walls, bleeding, broken, mutilated. Servants confessed under torture that hundreds of young women, some say over 600, had been lured to the castle and never left. Elizabeth was arrested, but unlike her servants, she was never formally tried in court. Some say it was to protect her noble name. Others suggest something more sinister, a cover-up. She was sentenced to house arrest, confined to a small room inside her castle. The windows were bricked up. Only a small slit was left for food and air. She would remain there for the last 4 years of her life. Truth beneath the horror. But even in her silence, the doubts remained. Many historians now believe the evidence was thin, even fabricated. No written confessions from Elizabeth survive. Only second-hand reports, often extracted through torture. Some of her supposed victims were alive and well, but vanished from records. More importantly, Elizabeth owned vast lands. Upon her death, those lands would revert to the crown, unless passed on legally. Seizing her estate would be convenient. Could it be that Elizabeth Bathory, the so-called Blood Countess, was a threat not because of murder but because of wealth, power, and intellect? A noble woman who ruled like a man, in a world that feared women like her? The legacy of blood. Elizabeth Bathory died in 1614, locked away and forgotten. But she did not stay forgotten. Over centuries, her legend grew. She became a vampire, a witch, a murderess, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and in haunted halls. But between the myth and the truth lies a different kind of horror. Not the horror of blood, but of erasure. A woman whose life was rewritten, defamed, and twisted into something monstrous. What if the real Elizabeth was never allowed to speak? What if history, like her enemies, bricked up her voice, leaving only shadows and screams? To be continued. In Part 2, we'll descend deeper into the trial of shadows, the official records, the corrupted justice, and the dark alliances behind the accusations. Was Elizabeth truly guilty of unspeakable crimes? Or was she simply too powerful to live? Subscribe to Obscure Truths, because the darkest truths are the ones hidden in plain sight. The Trial of Shadows. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, on trial, or betrayed. The darkest trials don't happen in courts. They happen in silence, in locked rooms, in records rewritten by the victors. The empire trembles. It was the dawn of the 17th century. The Kingdom of Hungary stood divided, its lands fractured between the rising power of the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg monarchy, and local nobles carving their own domains. Religious tensions simmered beneath political unrest. Protestant and Catholic powers clashed, the peasantry starved, and in the midst of this chaos, one name rose like a curse: Elizabeth Bathory. Her legend had spread from the Carpathians to Vienna, rumors of missing girls, blood rituals, satanic rites. But no one moved against her, not yet. She was too rich, too noble, too protected. But even empires tremble when gold is at stake. The instruments of accusation. The first official investigation began in 1610, launched by King Matthias II. But the king did not act out of justice, he acted out of debt. Elizabeth had lent the crown large sums of money. Upon her arrest, those debts could be nullified. Convenient. Matthias appointed György Thurzo, Palatine of Hungary, and Elizabeth's own relative, to lead the inquiry. A nobleman investigating another noble. Thurzo gathered witnesses, servants, villagers, clergy. Most of them were interrogated under torture. Their testimonies read like nightmares. She pierced their lips with needles. She made us strip them and rub ash into their wounds. I saw her bite the flesh from their shoulders with her teeth. Some claimed over 650 girls were killed. But here's the twist. There were no bodies, no graves, no official record of the supposed victims. Only confessions, drawn from blood and fear. The Silent Court. On December 29, 1610, Thurzo raided Chaktica Castle. He claimed to find tortured girls, corpses, instruments of pain. Elizabeth was arrested that night, but she was never brought before a public court. No defense, no trial, just silence. Why? Because to try her publicly would risk dragging the noble class through the mud. It would expose land disputes, debts, secrets better left buried. Her 4 closest servants, Dorotea Sentes, Ilona Yo, Catalin Beniska, and Janos Huvari, were tried instead, found guilty, executed. Elizabeth, however, was sentenced to house arrest, sealed behind the stone walls of her own castle. A queen in a cage. Enemies in the shadows. Was this justice or orchestrated betrayal? Let's follow the trail of motive. Thurzo gained fame and political favor by bringing down the Blood Countess. Long nobles coveted her estates. With her out of the way, land changed hands, quietly. Even members of her own family stood to benefit from her downfall. She had no surviving male heir. Her husband, Ferenc Nadasti, had died in 1604. With his death, Elizabeth became one of the wealthiest landowners in Hungary. A woman with wealth, with control, with no husband. She was dangerous, too dangerous. Letters from the cell. In her final years, Elizabeth was confined to a single chamber, its windows brick shut. But she wrote. Fragments of her letters remain, cold, defiant, aching. They have made me a monster in the eyes of the world, but no one dares to face me. I ask only to see the sky again before I die. If I am to be judged, let it be by God, not by those who fear me. She never confessed, not once. She maintained her innocence until the end. In 1614, she stopped eating. Her guards found her dead in bed, her hands clenched, her face turned toward the wall. She was 54 years old. The price of power. Was she guilty? Or was her greatest crime being a woman with too much? Let's consider what Elizabeth represented. So far, he ruled vast lands. Ragan enforced justice. She made loans to kings. She did not remarry. Ephemeride expectations. In a patriarchal world, her very existence was a provocation. In her, the nobles saw a mirror they hated, a woman who had become what only men were allowed to be. Some historians now suggest the stories of blood bathing and torture were exaggerated or invented, a blend of folklore, political slander, and misogyny. But the truth may never be known. Shadows that remain today. Elizabeth Bathory is remembered not as a woman, but as a myth. She is the Blood Countess, a vampire, a predator, a demon in silk. But how much of that is real? And how much is the echo of fear and envy? The trial that never was still casts a shadow, and in that shadow a voice still whispers, I was more than the monster they needed me to be. To be continued. In part 3 of this series, we will explore how Elizabeth Bathory's name became legend, how she was reborn in horror films, gothic novels, and vampire lore. We will meet her descendants in fiction, from Carmilla to Lady Dimitrescu, from blood rituals to pop culture queens. How did a woman erased by history become immortal? Stay with us. Subscribe to Obscure Truths, because behind every myth, there's a truth struggling to be heard. The Immortal Curse. Elizabeth Bathory, from Blood Countess to eternal legend. Some monsters are born, others are written into eternity. The death of a name. When Elizabeth Bathory died in 1614, the world did not roar. No trial had concluded, no justice had been served, there was no monument, no requiem, just silence. But silence is fertile ground for legends. Though her body was buried in obscurity, her name refused to die. It drifted through the Carpathian winds, passed from peasant to priest, from innkeeper to poet, and what history forgot, folklore devoured. Countess to vampire. By the 18th century, Elizabeth's name began to twist into myth. Writers and travelers recounted dark tales from Hungary, a noblewoman who bathed in the blood of virgins to stay eternally young. Her castle became a haunted ruin, her portrait a forbidden icon. She was no longer just a woman, she became a vampire. Centuries before Bram Stoker penned Dracula. Some even argue that Stoker's Count Dracula was inspired not just by Vlad the Impaler, but by Elizabeth Bathory, the female mirror to his bloodlust, his immortality. But while Dracula thirsted for blood as a predator, Elizabeth was reimagined as something more complex, a woman punished for wanting to control time, beauty, and power. In the 19th century, Gothic literature embraced Elizabeth's shadow. In 1872, Carmilla was published, a vampire tale featuring a female predator who seduces and kills young women. The parallels to Bathory were unmistakable: aristocratic, beautiful, elegant, and deadly. In these stories, the vampire was not just a creature, it was a symbol of forbidden desire, feminine rebellion, and fear of the untamed woman. Elizabeth's myth fit perfectly into this mold. She was painted as the femme fatale of horror, the elegant evil in lace and blood. Her legend became a mirror, reflecting society's unease with female power, aging, and autonomy, beauty, and control. Why did the image of bathing in virgin blood become so iconic? Because it struck at the heart of society's deepest taboos: the fear of women who defy age, the fear of female control over youth and sexuality, the fear of beauty as a weapon. In a world where women were expected to age quietly and lose their influence, the myth of Bathory was terrifying. Not because of what she did, but because of what she represented. She wasn't aging gracefully, she wasn't disappearing, she was fighting time, with blood if necessary. That's why history didn't just erase her, it demonized her. Modern resurrections. The 20th and 21st centuries resurrected Elizabeth again, this time through film, literature, games, and pop culture. In horror films, she appears as the beautiful noblewoman who murders for youth. In video games like Castlevania, she's referenced as a boss or villain. In Resident Evil Village, Lady Dimitrescu, tall, elegant, vampiric, is a clear homage to Bathory's legacy. In music, comics, and Gothic fashion, she remains a symbol of deadly beauty. She has become eternally fashionable, forever feared, and strangely admired. Her story has transcended history. She's no longer just Elizabeth, she's the archetype. History's final judgment. But beneath the myth, what of the woman? Was she truly a murderer, or a brilliant, independent woman torn down by patriarchy and fear? The truth may lie somewhere between. Perhaps she was cruel. Perhaps she punished servants harshly, as many nobles did. Perhaps stories grew in the retelling. Perhaps some were invented entirely. But what we know is this: she was never given a fair trial. Wreckage never confessed. Roserac, he was richer than kings and refused to bow, and history loves to punish such women. Legacy in darkness. Elizabeth Bathory died alone, but she lives in the dark corners of our imagination. She reminds us of the thin line between monster and martyr, between truth and legend, between power and persecution. In every story where a woman is called too ambitious, in every whisper that a woman is too cold, too powerful, too strange, Elizabeth's curse continues. But perhaps it is not a curse at all. Perhaps it is a warning. If you tell a story often enough, it becomes truth. And if you bury a woman deep enough in legend, she becomes eternal. Epilogue. Thus ends the tale of Elizabeth Bathory, noble woman, accused killer, immortal myth. Whether villain or victim, she has outlived her enemies. She remains one of the most enduring figures of dark history, not because of what she did, but because of what we needed her to be. Subscribe to Obscure Truths, because in every legend, there's a woman they tried to forget.